everyone, welcome or welcome back. My name is Yuna, and today, in the face of the relentless and inescapable and unavoidable marching on of time, we are doing yet another monthly wrap-up. Dramatic for no reason. April is over, so I'm going to be talking about all of the books that I read in April. I read 15 books in April, and I feel like these wrap-up videos tend to go a little longer because if I really love a book or if I had issues with the book, I can rant about it for a bit, but I'm gonna try to keep as many of these concise as I can, especially because a bunch of them I read for a reading vlog, or I have an upcoming reading vlog where I'm going to be sharing much longer thoughts about those books. So we'll see. I'm going to try to keep it under an hour. We'll see if I do it. I will say I'm really excited for May because it's AAPI month, and so I want to do a video highlighting some of my favorite books by Asian American or Asian or Pacific Islander authors. It's probably going to be a similar case to the Amazing Black Authors videos where I had to split that into 2 videos because there were just too many books for me to try to talk about in one sitting. So keep an eye out for that. It's going to be a mix of books and authors I recommend and books and authors I am looking forward to getting acquainted with. And I'm sorry if the lighting gets kind of funky. It's a really cloudy, stormy day, so the sun is kind of going in and out. So it might get dark at points and get brighter at points. I don't know. I'll try and fix it in post. Okay, last thing before I start. I feel like I've said this in multiple videos now, but I want to say it again that my star ratings are very fluid. I will be giving them throughout this video, but depending on the day, depending on my mood, depending on maybe if I've thought more about the book and come to a new conclusion or something, my ratings change all the time, so please don't take them too seriously. Take them with a grain of salt and just don't put too much weight on my star ratings. Alright, enough blabbering, let's get to the books. So right off the bat, I'm failing you guys because the first book I read in April was a poetry collection called Joy in the Belly of a Riot by Barbara Font, and I have looked everywhere and I have no idea where I put this book. It's rolling around somewhere in one of my many bookcases and I can't find it, and it's such a slim little book that I think it's just disappeared and I don't know where it went. So this poetry collection I really enjoyed. I wouldn't say that it's my new favorite poetry collection or anything like that, but I thought that it was really beautiful, and there were a few poems in there that I really loved, and I was hoping to read you one of them because I thought some of the lines about blackness and black femininity was so beautiful, and I don't know where it is. So maybe what I'll try to do is maybe I can find the book and I'll put a picture, I'll insert a picture of the page or something like that and do a voiceover of me reading it, or I don't know, maybe I can just like put it on the screen and you guys can read it on your own time. So sorry, I did want to share that with you, but I just don't freaking know. I don't know where I put it. I have no idea. Sorry. This poetry collection touched on a bunch of things from blackness, black identity, the black experience, femininity, womanhood, motherhood, divinity, forgiveness, society, just a bunch of things. And there were definitely poems that I connected with more than others. I think there were a few where she played with structure and some of those didn't land for me quite as much, but yeah, I did overall really enjoy this collection, and I again wish I could find the book so I could read something for you. But I give this 3.5 stars. I think there are some poems in there that I would rate higher, but overall I really liked it. Next in April, I read 3 books for the reading vlog where I took you guys with me to Hawaii and California, and I'm going to try and keep these relatively quick. I might spend a little more time on my favorite of the bunch, but again, if you want my full thoughts, I have multiple check-ins and I talk about them at length with and without spoilers in the reading vlog. I'll link that in the description, so go ahead and check that out if you want to hear more of my thoughts. The first of the books that I read for that vlog was The 7 Moons of Maoli Almeida by Shahan Karunatalaka. So if you didn't watch that vlog, the premise was basically I picked 3 books solely on their covers. If I liked the covers, I picked them up. I didn't look into the premise or anything like that, and I went into them blind to see if I enjoyed the book as much as the cover suggested I would. This book is by a Sri Lankan author, and it was so delightful. It was very much about and based in Sri Lanka, and it was fun going into it without any idea of the premise because I could not have guessed what it was about. I think I described the opening scene of this book as serving Sri Lankan Beetlejuice, and I loved it. This book follows the main character, Maoli Almeida, who was a war or conflict photographer, and he wakes up in the beginning of this book in what is basically like a waiting room in the afterlife. He has no recollection of how he died, who killed him, why he died, but he is told he has 7 moons, or essentially 7 days, to get his house in order, figure out what he needs to figure out, and settle his debts and all that stuff before he moves on, gets reincarnated, moves on to the next life. Molly uses those 7 days to try to lead his ex-lover, or his lover when he was alive, Dee Dee, and his best friend Jackie, to uncover the secrets of his death and to also lead them to a mysterious box that hides things untold that I won't spoil. Even though this is a political satire, I found that the book was really playful, and towards the end there were also a bunch of moments that I thought were really poignant, and I'm pretty sure, yeah, I do read one of my favorite passages from this in the vlog, so you can go check that out. Actually, you know what, it's really short, so I'll just go ahead and read it for you again here. I will say that even though it's towards the end of the book, it doesn't contain any spoilers for the plot or anything like that, so if you are okay with that, you can stick around, or if you don't want to hear me read something from the end of the book, even though again I think it's pretty spoiler free without context, then you can skip. You saw Didi's face and how different it was from his father's, and you saw him on a plane landing somewhere sunny, and you pictured him purifying poisoned wells, and you daydreamed of him smiling. You imagined him lending his life to some pointless cause just like you had, and it made you happy. We must all find pointless causes to live for, or why bother with breath? Because on reflection, once you have seen your own face and recognized the color of your eyes, tasted the air and smelled the soil, drunk from the purest fountains and the dirtiest wells, that is the kindest thing you can say about life. It's not nothing. So I thought this was a really powerful book that is very bleak and dark and gruesome at times, but like that quote suggests, it does still point to a lot of the hope that exists and the fact that we do still have to live and make the most of the time that we have. As I mentioned, this book is very much anchored in Sri Lankan politics, Sri Lankan history, and Sri Lankan mythology. While I don't think that this book is opaque, and I don't think you need a deep understanding of those things to enjoy and appreciate the book, I do wish that I had read it at a time when I was somewhere where I could dedicate more of my brain power and energy to reading about those things and kind of cross-referencing, because I'm a freaking nerd and I like to have context for the things I'm reading, especially if I'm reading something like this book where there is a lot of real-world politics and societal issues that are being addressed in the story. So if you're in the mood for satire, political commentary, or you want to read a book by a Sri Lankan author about Sri Lanka, then I highly recommend. I gave this book 4 stars, I think. The second book that I read for that vlog was Cursed Daughters by Oyinkan Braithwaite. Again, a book I picked up because I thought the cover was stunning and I thought that the story inside was really good. I have more mixed feelings about this one and I'll get into that, but this story is about several generations of women in the same family. Earlier on in their family tree, there was a woman who was cursed to never be able to keep a man she loves and never be able to keep a man in her family, and the story follows, again, multiple generations of women and shows us how that curse has manifested in their lives. We have 3 main characters: Ibun, Ibun's cousin Monife, and Ibun's daughter Iniyi. When we start this book, Ibun's cousin Monife has drowned herself, and on the same day that they bury Monife, Ibun gives birth to her daughter Iniyi, who is the spitting image of Monife, and basically everyone considers her to be the reincarnation of Monife. The book jumps back and forth between these 3 women's lives. We go back in time, forward in time, so we follow all 3 of their lives and see the way that this curse, this inability to keep a man that they love in their lives, affects them. There's a bit of magical realism going on, and you never really know if the curse is an actual magical curse or if it is more just the manifestation of these women's expectations and their choices. But yeah, we follow them and see how the curse affects them. Again, I'm gonna forego a full spoiler section and you can check out the vlog to get my full thoughts, but I thought that the prose here was easy to read. It's not overly lyrical or super decorated with lots of bells and whistles, but it was easy to read. The book flew by. I enjoyed all 3 of the women and their perspectives. I think that the main issue that I had with this book was fully down to personal taste. I can see how this book is going to be a home run for a lot of people, but for me, the fact that the sort of main catalyst of tension and conflict in the book was this curse which centers around the inability of these women to keep men, I just didn't find that to be the most interesting of tension points. I would have rather that we had siphoned a bit of time away from focusing on the romantic relationships in these women's lives and taken a bit more time to dive into the interpersonal relations with the women in their family and just more of their internal workings. I feel like we only skimmed the surface or just didn't go as deeply into some of the relationships as I would have wanted. I want to see more about Ibun and Iniyi's relationship as mother and daughter, and I really want to know more about Monife and Ibun's relationship, specifically around like one plot point. I just thought that there was a lot of meaty stuff in there that we didn't really get to visit, and I would have loved to have seen more of that. I'm pretty sure in the reading vlog I summed up my reservations about this book with that meme where the girl is like, hit him with your car.
He is not the love of your life. He is literally just a guy.
I just think that these women were such goddesses and had such power on their own, and I was just like, come on ladies, you don't need to bag that man, it's gonna be okay. So if that sounds like something that would be interesting and moving to you, then absolutely, obviously this could be a home run, but like I said, it was just personal preference. I gave this book 3.75 stars. I really liked it and I would still recommend it. It was just a very personal hang up that kept it from being a home run for me. The final book that I read for that vlog was also my favorite, and that is The Hounding by Shinobi Purvis. I really loved this book. I guess that this book might be about dogs, but boy, it was not in the way that I was expecting. This book is The Crucible or Scarlet Letter meets Doggos. This book follows 5 orphan sisters who live with their grandfather on the outskirts of this little town called Nettlebed in the 1800s, I think? Yeah, 1800s in England. After a series of events, there are rumors and suspicions that are spread amongst the town people, and they begin to suspect that the girls are either possessed or evil or demonic in some way and are transforming into dogs. I think that this is a really well-written book with atmospheric and descriptive and fable-like writing. Right from the first line on page 1, there is this tension and darkness that is immediately apparent, and this foreboding sense and heaviness in the air and atmosphere that just continues to build throughout the book. I'll read you the first line. The girls, the infernal heat, a fresh dead body. This book is about so many things. It's about sexism, it's about patriarchy, it's about the danger of groupthink, it's about the way that lies and stories can take on a life of their own and be really dangerous. It's about the dangers of being free and different, especially as women or young girls in society, and it is also very, very much about toxic masculinity. One of the things that I love most about this book is the way that it explores toxic masculinity, because it doesn't just talk about the way that it is a danger to the lives and safety of girls and women. It also really heartbreakingly explores how toxic masculinity is a poison to the sensitivity and goodness and kindness in boys and men. There are so many characters that I was so concerned about in this book, and not just for their lives or for their physical safety, which yes, there were moments I was concerned about those things, but I was also so worried about their hearts and their souls, because another big theme in this book is how societal pressure just crushes the individuality and the wildness in people. There was one man in this book who I hated, and I was praying for his downfall. Through him, we really look at the idea that men are afraid of being embarrassed and women are afraid of being killed. For this man, the worst thing that he seems to be able to imagine is people not thinking that he's amazing, is being embarrassed by women or being embarrassed by a girl, and somehow that to him justifies violence against women. I really want to, but again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this book because, like I said, I have the vlog where I've given you my full thoughts and I read a bunch of passages from this book that I think are really poignant and very emotional and made me feel a lot of things. So I highly recommend you go check out that vlog, or at least check out the end of the vlog where I give my final thoughts, because I have a spoiler free and spoiler section where I think I gush about this book for a while and I really loved it. I would love to just talk about it for as long as I can, but I'm gonna practice some self-restraint and just direct you to check out that other video if you want my thoughts. Next is another book that I cannot seem to find, which is an issue because it's a library book and I'm pretty sure I have to return it soon. But next I read No Country for 8-Spot Butterflies by Julian Aguan. This was the only nonfiction I read this month, and it was a really lovely, reflective, lyrical essay about environmental justice, specifically environmental justice overlapping with Indigenous rights in Guam. It can be read and applied more broadly, but the author is from Guam and he writes about his experiences from childhood. So yeah, I'm always interested in reading about Indigenous perspectives on the environment and our relationship with the natural world. So this was just a really enjoyable read, and it gave me some insight into a community and area that I don't think I or most people interface with that often. I probably do more than the average person because actually through work, I work with people and scholars in Guam. But I digress. This was a pretty easy and short read, and I think that if you are interested in kind of dipping your toes into environmental justice or climate change or environmental justice specifically from Indigenous lenses, then you should pick this up. For those of you who don't know, I don't really rate memoirs anymore, and while this isn't necessarily marketed as a memoir, it felt close enough because it had so much of the author's personal experiences that I have opted not to rate it, but I would recommend people pick it up. Alright, the next book is probably going to be my big ramble of this month's wrap-up. I've noticed that in every monthly wrap-up, there's usually 1 or 2 books that take up the bulk of my time, and this one might be it for this month. That book is none other than The Bone People by Carrie Holm. Whew, what a book! Carrie Holm is a Maori writer from New Zealand, and this book was such a ride. I read the author's note in the beginning, and she was saying how it was very hard to market this book or to get someone to want to pick up this book, and I can understand why. How to describe this very, very, very unique book. This is a book with a really funky narrative storytelling structure, and it left me both awed and fighting some conflicting feelings. It is a book that is filled with trauma and pain and connection and neglect and abuse and maybe some hope and a lot of very, very messed up people. I'll try to start with the premise and plot and keep it as spoiler free as I can. This book takes place in New Zealand, and it tells the story of the very complicated relationships of three people who meet towards the beginning of the book. There are three main characters, and one of them is Karen Holmes, who is probably very much a self-insert for Carrie Holm. I mean, the names are similar, and I think just based on descriptions and things that I've read, Carrie has to at least some degree created Karen Holmes as a stand-in for herself in the story. Karen is this reclusive, introverted artist who is of mixed Maori descent, and she lives estranged from her family and community. At the beginning of this book, she meets the other two main characters, one of whom is a young boy named Simon. Simon is mute, so he can't speak, and he is described as difficult by different people for a number of reasons. Acts out in various ways. He's a little feral. He likes to steal people's things. He has a variety of triggers and traumas that can make him difficult to soothe or calm when he is triggered. He was found as a young boy after a shipwreck, so no one knows anything about him, and so it's hard to really know where all of his triggers stem from. The third main character is Joe, who is Simon's unofficial adopted or foster father. Because Simon was found after a shipwreck and there is no real official record of him or his family or his background, there is therefore no real record officially or documentation of Joe adopting Simon, so it's all very unofficial. But for the purposes of their lives, Joe is Simon's adopted father. Man, this story really pushes readers, or at least it really pushed me, to grapple with the edges of what I consider a redeemable person, a redeemable character. These characters are all really troubled and troubling, particularly the adults. For me, particularly the adults. They're, outcasts or estranged from their families or from their societies in different ways, and they tentatively create this little circle, this found family, but it's intensely challenged by multiple things. I mean, really, it's one main thing that challenges their little found family, which I will leave for the spoilers. The writing style of this book is intensely and unapologetically unconventional, and it's all over the place. In the span of a single page, this book will switch from first person to second person to third person, and it'll switch through multiple points of views with no demarcation, so you have no idea at certain points who's saying what or who's thinking what at first, and it's really disorienting, but it is one of those things that I think you get into the rhythm of once you've let yourself experience some of the book. Actually, if you've read The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez, it's kind of like that, where it has a very fluid and unexplained and kind of jarring structure where you're jumping from different points of views, you're jumping from first person to third person, and you're not always really sure who's speaking. Just like with Spear Cuts Through Water, I did get used to the structure, but I think that this is even more frenetic and even more chaotic than Spear Cuts Through Water. One of the things that I really loved and appreciated, because I am someone who loves languages, was the incorporation of Maori language. Throughout the book, the characters use Maori words and phrases, and at the back there is a glossary that contains the translations into English of what those phrases mean. For me, that really added to the experience. Like I said, I love languages. I love the power of speaking a particular language and the weight of a language and all of the memory and intention that using a particular language or a particular phrase in that language holds. I think particularly for a lot of marginalized communities, especially communities who have been told they cannot speak their languages, that have been systematically made to give up their languages because of the cultural power and significance they hold, just being able to interact with them in a book is just really special to me. It's something I always treasure. There is also Maori magic and mythology that gets incorporated into the story, but I thought that the way it happened was a bit jarring, or actually unincorporated, if that makes sense. The first 75% of this book felt like a very realistic and troubling look into the lives of three very complicated people. Again, I'm keeping this as spoiler free as I can, but suddenly in the last like 25% of this book, the mythology just came in really heavy and ended up being a huge part of the conclusion of the book. And I don't know, I can't say that I necessarily hated the way that it was done, but it was a bit jarring, but a lot of this book was jarring, so I don't know. I'm still messing around with how I feel about that and processing. Alright, moving into the spoiler section for this book. Just skip ahead to the end of the spoilers if you don't want any spoilers. I said in the spoiler-free section that Karenin, Joe, and Simon create this found family, this little network, and there is one main point of tension that threatens everything that they are building together. That stems from Karenin realizing that Simon has been and is being physically abused by Joe. Joe abuses Simon, and I don't mean that he just spanks him or something like that. Like, he beats this child. It's portrayed as a really complicated scenario because on one hand, Joe does seem to deeply care for Simon. He is really attentive and really tender and understands and caters to a lot of Simon's needs most of the time. He seems really devoted to Simon and does his best to help him through his traumas, and Joe is the person that Simon, this little child, does consider his home and his father. There is tenderness and love between them, but like I said, Joe also violently beats Simon. The way it's written, it almost seems like Joe feels like he kind of blacks out, or he doesn't really have control over himself when he does it, and frequently he will apologize, and he has told Simon, I won't do it again. When Karenin realizes that this is going on, she doesn't immediately confront him or report him or anything like that. She just kind of cautiously observes. This goes on for a while, and at the big climactic confrontation of the book, Joe severely beats Simon, and Simon in that altercation stabs Joe. Joe is hurt, but he recovers, but Simon is beat so badly that he ends up in a coma with brain damage, and he actually seems to lose his hearing, which is, the boy is he's already mute and struggling with so many things, so the fact that he seems to also lose his hearing because of, I'm gonna cry, because of his dad, that was so heartbreaking to me. If you don't want to hear me read about that scene, then please just skip forward a bit. The world is full of dazzlement, jewel beams, fires of crystal splendor. I'm on fire. He is aching. He's breaking apart with pain. The agony is everywhere. Hands, body, legs, head. He is shaking so badly he cannot stand. The hard wood keeps grinding past him. He keeps trying to stand. Joe's voice is thin and distant. Joe screams. The first punch hits his head. His head slams back into the door frame. The punches keep coming. Again, again, and again. The lights and fires are going out. He weeps for them. The blood pours from everywhere. He can feel it spilling from his mouth, his ears, his eyes, and his nose. The drone of flies gets louder. The world goes away. The night has come. And this is a description of Simon in the hospital after this beating. But remembering the child's face pains her. She has to strip away the vision of how it looked the last 2 times she saw it. The bloody swollen mask on the floor, broken nose, broken jaw, and the horrible indentation in the side of his skull where he had been smashed against the door frame. Ornamented, whitened, bandaged with care but looking lifeless. Oh, his eyes had opened several times, but the sea color had gone, and he didn't see her. He didn't see anyone or anything. His eyes looked dead. We don't know how much damage there is. All we've done is remove the clot and repair the bone. He may not be able to see. It's almost certain he won't be able to hear, and it's likely he has suffered irreversible harm as far as his mental processes are concerned. This happens maybe 75-80% into the book, and after this, Joe goes to jail, and Kerwin just kind of disappears. She just takes her stuff and walks off into the distance, I guess. And Simon is sent to a school for orphans, or a special school. This is the point at which I feel like the story kind of goes off the rails and becomes a completely different thing. Like, up until this point, it's been about these 3 people, about their relationships, about their flaws, about trying to figure out if they can be some sort of broken little family. But from here on, it's mostly about Joe and Kerwin having these separate experiences with Maori magic and having these kind of healing redemption arcs through that experience, or through those experiences. Again, I'm still wrestling with my feelings, but I don't really think I love how this was done, because these are 2 really, really messed up people who treated Simon really poorly in different ways and failed to take care of him in the ways that he needed, to put it lightly. And on one hand, I have so much respect for the power of traditions and cultures and beliefs, and on the other hand, I couldn't help but be upset that all of their wrongs and flaws and abuse was redeemed with their encounters with these aspects of Maori mythology. Again, I don't know, I'm still really thinking about it, but I don't think that it really landed well for me. It's just really hard for me to grapple with the horrendous things that were done to Simon by both Joe, obviously, but also Kerwin, because she knew what was happening and didn't really intervene in any way. It's complicated. I know it's complicated, and the complexity is written throughout the book, but she doesn't really do anything to step in a significant way. And there are points at which, when she's upset with him, she yells at him and says awful things. She says things like, I get why Joe beats you, I understand why you're treated the way you're being treated. And she says that to this, to this little boy who is, yes, he can be difficult in ways, but he's just a kid, and he loves both Joe and Kerwin so much. And it just really destroyed me to see the way, oh my god, to see the way that he was being treated. And yet he still was clinging so much to these two people. He feels that they're his whole world. I know people feel many different ways about abuse and neglect, but I do think that a parent who loves their child can still be abusive, whether that is intentional or unintentional. I think that it's very complicated. I talked about that with Shuggy Bane, right? And I know that Joe has his own traumas and his own issues that he has to work through, but the level of abuse in this book made it hard for me to be, I don't know if convinced is the right word, not convinced by his redemption arc, but invested in his redemption arc or the way that unfolded. And I can just imagine a lot of people who have gone through abusive situations, whether that's with a partner or with a parent or with a friend, just people who have gone through abuse. I can see why this book might be really infuriating to read. I'll end the spoiler section there and just say that it's hard to know if or how to recommend this book. I think it's unlike 99% of books I've read, other than The Spirit Cuts Through Water, in terms of structure. It's really hard to compare it to anything. It's powerfully written. It is about really messed up people and messed up relationships, and if you are looking for that and you're okay with having conflicting feelings, then maybe this book is for you. And if you appreciate experimental and funky, confusing narrative structures, then again, maybe this is for you. If you're looking to pick up a book from a Maori author, this is also maybe for you. I know I said this is a spoiler-free section, but I'm gonna give a content warning. So if you don't want content warnings, then skip ahead to the next book, but I am going to give one here, so you've been warned. One more time, if you don't want a content warning that contains spoilers, skip ahead. Have you left? Okay. I would not recommend you pick up this book if you do not want to read about child abuse. There is really horrific, harrowing, physical abuse inflicted on a child in this book. And furthermore, I don't think that you should read this book if you don't want to read about abusers being portrayed in a sympathetic way, or abusers getting redemption arcs. If that's just something that you don't have the emotional capacity for, then do not pick up this book. I'm not saying that the abuser is portrayed as having done no wrong. He is definitely portrayed as being problematic. His actions are problematic, but yeah. As I am still very much grappling with my own feelings about this book, I'm really not sure what to rate it. If I was rating it purely for uniqueness and experimentation, then it would be 5 stars easy, but overall, I don't know because of how conflicted I am about the content and sort of the ending of this book. I think I would still give it maybe 4 stars, but again, I don't know. I'm thinking about it. That might change. But 4 stars for now. This was definitely a really difficult and challenging read. How do I still have so many books to talk about? Okay, I'm gonna have to try and go faster through some of these. The next 2 books I'm once again gonna try to breeze through because they are the 2 books that I read for my second reading vlog that I filmed last month. I don't actually think that it will be posted by the time that this book comes up, but the next video, probably after this, is going to be the reading vlog where I read these 2 books. So check that out when it comes out if you want my full thoughts, and if you want to see me through the process of reading it, be really grossed out and get really emotional, then yeah, check out the vlog. For now, I will just give some quick summaries about how I felt. Or if you want to be surprised in terms of how I felt in my commentary, then skip these books and just check out the vlog when it comes out. So I read 2 horror books for that vlog, and the first is Bat Eater and Other Names for Cora Zheng by Kylie Lee Baker. I had such a good, uncomfortable, grossed out, pissed off time with this horror story. So quick summary, this book takes place during the peak years of COVID and follows a young Chinese American woman named Cora. When the book opens, she and her sister Delilah are in the subway in New York City, and this masked man comes out of nowhere and pushes Delilah in front of a train and kills her, calling her Bat Eater in this act of racial violence. While working this job, she and her coworkers Yifei and Harvey realize that they are tied together by the fact that all of the victims have been young East Asian women. The killer has been leaving bats at the scenes of the crimes as some sort of calling card. Cora suspects that the serial killer is the person who killed her sister, and so she is kind of trying to look into this and figure out who this person is. And at the same time that this is happening, she's starting to have these weird supernatural experiences and believes that she is being haunted by the hungry ghost of her sister. I thought that the horror elements of this book, the gore, the body horror, the supernatural horror, all of it was really disturbingly and well executed, and was also balanced really well with the exploration of some really grounded and emotional themes like identity and codependence and racism and community. The book tackled some real life horrors that people have to live through, like racism and hate crimes, and all of that was wrapped up and presented in this really engaging story. I think that Cora is also a really interesting protagonist. She has a bunch of issues, and she has social anxiety, and she has what I suspect is some kind of OCD or some sort of compulsive behavior, and she's going through a lot of grief after her sister's death, but she also had a very codependent and toxic relationship with her sister, so she's also trying to figure out who she is in the wake of losing that part of her identity. There's a lot of complicated things going on along with the horror elements, and to me the ending of this book, I talk about it in the vlog, but the ending of this book was so horrific. The things that Cora comes to realize about these murders, about this killer, and about racism against East Asian women specifically in this time, I had a lot of feelings about it, so again, I won't go into it here. Check out the vlog. But I gave this book 4 stars. I'll say 4 stars for now, and I thought that it was really powerful. I thought it was well written. I really enjoyed the prose and the tension and the supernatural elements, and how Chinese culture was integrated into the supernatural elements. So love this, highly recommend. The second horror book that I read for that vlog was The Reformatory by Tananarive Due. And woo, this was another heavy hitter. This was such a powerful book for some of the same reasons as Bat Eater, because they both deal with aspects of horror that are tied to real life events. Obviously, Bat Eater is different, that it's set much closer to present time, and this is set in the 1950s, but they both deal with real life issues of racism and racial violence, and yeah, just incredible, really powerful. This book is written with pretty measured and straightforward prose, and the story follows two siblings, Robbie and his older sister Gloria, in Florida in the 1950s. One really heartbreaking aspect of this book is that the book was inspired by the events at a real reformatory school that existed, and Robbie was named for Tananarive, the author's great uncle, who was sent to the reformatory school and died when he was 15. At the beginning of this book, there is a white boy who harasses Gloria, and Robbie, trying to protect his sister, kicks this boy. And for the unimaginable crime of being a black boy who dared to kick a white boy, Robbie is he's sentenced to 6 months at this reformatory school, and he is sent away. Robbie has the ability to see and communicate with haints or ghosts, and while at the reformatory, this ability turns out to be both a blessing and a curse. He meets an array of people, he makes a couple friends, and has to use his ability to try to survive the abuse and horrors that are happening at this school. Gloria through the book is busy. This girl is doing everything in her power to try to get her little brother out of this school. You know, she's so determined and smart, but she's also young and very rash and reactive, and I was so nervous for her, especially in her interactions with white people. She also has a power of her own, which is different from Robbie's. She has this sort of clairvoyance, and she's able to know certain things. She knows things that are happening, and she seems to be able to have visions almost of things that are going to happen, and that was really interesting to read about. This is a heftier book at almost 600 pages, and I was on the edge of my seat for pretty much all of it. I think there were some moments here and there where I started to feel its length, but overall really expertly done. I'm pretty sure I mentioned this in the vlog as well, but this sort of reminded me of Ring Shout or even Buffalo Hunter Hunter, which are both books that explore the horrors of real history and explore that through this genre of historical horror with these supernatural elements. Yeah, if you want to see me cry about this book, then definitely check out the vlog. I don't know what to rate it. I don't know that it's a 5-star read for me, but it's pretty dang close, so maybe 4.5 stars. It's a heavy, difficult read, again, with a lot of abuse and horrendous treatment of children, so check your trigger warnings if you have to, but I do definitely recommend you check this out. Alright, I can feel that my voice is starting to go. I'm chugging water off camera. I've been recording for over an hour and a half, and I still have multiple books to get through, so grant me strength. Next is a book that I've had on my TBR for a while and was very happy to get to, and that is Kaikeyi by Vaishnavi Patel. As I said in my TBR video, this is a feminist retelling of the Hindu classic Ramayana, in which Kaikeyi is this sort of jealous or evil stepmother type of character. While I didn't necessarily get through the entire epic, I am still really glad that I took the time to at least familiarize myself with that story and the characters and the way that they're portrayed in the original story. I think the book can definitely stand on its own, and you don't have to do what I did and get familiar with the original story, but I personally think that when it comes to retellings, the most impactful way to consume them is to know the original story so that you can see what has been changed. So you can see the new perspective that the author is offering and see what clever new ways they've chosen to retell or twist things that you thought you knew. Now, in the original story, Kaikeyi is the third wife of a ruler, and she basically ends up manipulating her husband into exiling his first wife's son, who is heir to the throne, so that she can put her own son on the throne. I don't think I'm going to go into a whole in-depth spoiler section for this book, but Patel takes that story and spins it so that you can see Kaikeyi's side of that story, see her hopes, see her motivations, and makes her a sympathetic character so you understand why she did what she did and really kind of feel for her. I think that the way that her story was reimagined and filled in and fleshed out was done in a really satisfying way. I think that the prose was easy to read and lightly descriptive. It wasn't, overly lush or anything like that. Of course, I loved getting to read the scenes that were filled with Indian food and the creatures and mythology. I thought that that was also really, really cool. One thing that surprised me about this book, though, is that I thought that parts of it or aspects of it read almost a bit like YA. This isn't young adult, this is an adult book, but there was something about the way that it was written and some of the dialogue and the way that some of the themes were explored that felt to me like it just felt a bit YA. And I feel like I always have to say this, but I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I just wasn't expecting it. I think that the delivery and exploration of some of the themes, especially around feminism and sexism and gender inequality, was really heavy-handed. I think maybe halfway into the book, I was getting tired of having it drilled into me that Kaikeyi experiences sexism, that people treat her differently because she's a girl, and that Kaikeyi is a feminist. These are all things that I think are important, and I'm glad were incorporated into this retelling. But it almost felt like the author thought that if she didn't include a very explicit and laid out scene about gender inequality and Kaikeyi being a feminist in every chapter, the author feared that the reader wasn't going to get the message. I think that there were just so many instances where we could have just been shown the experiences, shown the interactions, just read the dialogue, and we didn't really need to be told exactly what those things meant. Same thing with the asexual representation in this book. I was very glad to see that representation included, and I was glad to see a depiction of spouses or romantic partners who could still be affectionate and still be dedicated to each other even if one of them is asexual. It's just I didn't need it to be said every single time that they had an interaction that this person doesn't feel sexual attraction. I was like, okay, I didn't forget from 30 pages ago when you told me this last time. And one more thing that I'm not too sure about, I'm gonna put this in a spoiler section even though it is, they talk about it on the dust cover, but they're not really specific about it, so I'll put it in the spoiler section even though I don't really think that it is a huge spoiler for plot or anything like that. So in this book, when Kaikeyi is a child, she gains the magical ability to see threads that are connecting people, and those threads represent their bond and their relationship, and the stronger the relationship between the people, between her and whatever person, then the thicker or more brilliant that thread looks. For some people that she's very close to, the thread is actually a thick rope. She's able to subtly manipulate this bond to influence people, and it's not all powerful, and if she pushes too hard she can actually shatter that bond and ruin the relationship, but it's just like a subtle way that she can try to influence people to do what she wants. Well, I thought this was interesting. I'm really not sure what this added to the story other than kind of a fun supernatural element. It doesn't really have a strong function other than to be a visual representation of relationships, and I actually think that the story would have been stronger without it, and I actually think that this is one of the things that made the book feel a bit YA to me. The fact that Kaikeyi can just look at these bonds and use that to get an idea of her relationship with someone, her standing with someone, I felt like that took away a lot of the subtleties and nuances and intuition needed to navigate interpersonal relationships, which I think it is a really important part of the book. And I felt like it was almost a mechanism, again, that you would see in like a YA fantasy book, helping younger people navigate interpersonal relationships. So I don't know, I actually thought that that detracted from the book for me, and I would have been happier to see Kaikeyi learn to navigate relationships and to, you know, use her political prowess and all of that to influence people without the use of this bond. I'm sure there are other people who really enjoyed that added aspect, but for me, I didn't really think that it contributed anything that significant and actually detracted a bit from the emotional complexity of the story for me. So that's the end of the spoiler section. So I think that I'm going to give this book 3.75 stars. Although I don't think that it was a perfect book by any means, I still really enjoyed it, and I had a really great time reading this retelling of what is a very old and well-established classic. Alright, I'm going to talk about the next 5 books all together because they are the first 5 books of the Heartstopper series by Alice Oseman. I'm just going to hold one up though because they're heavy. My boys, my sweet boys, I love this series so much. I think I read these 5 books within like 12 hours. I think the 6th book is supposed to drop in a couple months, and I will absolutely be devouring that, but I'm so sad because it's supposed to be the last book in the series. So Heartstopper is a graphic novel series that follows the relationship of 2 queer boys in high school. We watch them get to know each other and navigate a bunch of really complicated things that a lot of young people have to deal with, whether that is learning to grapple with their sexuality, coming out to friends and family, you know, disordered eating, anxiety, body image, asexuality, friend groups, identity, dealing with decisions about your future, complicated family relationships, absent parents, overbearing parents. There's just so much that's in these books, and I think that Alice managed to do all of that really gracefully and tastefully. Did I even say their names? The 2 boys are Charlie and Nick. This is Charlie and this is Nick. Reading this as a full-grown adult who has already gone through a lot of the things that these kids are grappling with, like dealing with my own sexuality, dealing with parental relationships or friend groups, all this stuff. And it makes me so emotional because I'm just so happy to think that there may be young people out there picking up these books and having these stories as a resource, being able to read about these characters and their relationships and to use that as a way to deal with their own struggles and navigate their own lives. Because being a young person in this day and age, any day and age really, but being a young person who is different, who feels ostracized, who feels like they're dealing with things like sexuality or mental health and don't know where to turn, like being able to just pick up a book and, you know, see your story reflected is such a powerful thing. I just feel so strongly that this is a series that should be in every single school library, no matter what the freaking right wingers say. Screw your book bans, screw your we have to protect the children and keep inappropriate content out of schools. These are the issues that young people today deal with and grapple with and struggle with and even end their own lives over because they don't know where to turn to get information or to be able to express themselves. And I just imagine that these are books that could literally save lives, and I'm like getting emotional about it. So I don't know, I'm really grateful that these exist. There are a lot of things I appreciate about these books, the representation, the queerness, all of that, but I also want to highlight a couple other things. While this book is definitely about the teenagers, I really appreciated that we also got to look into some of the complex inner lives of the adults that are around the children. I think that when you're a teenager, you frequently forget or don't even think about the fact that the adults around you, your parents, your teachers, are full, complicated, layered people who have even more history and more backstory than you do because they've lived longer, right? There's just a lot of layers to the adults. around them. And I think that, yeah, as a teenager, myself included, it's not something that I was always thinking about. So I love that the book takes some time to highlight some of the adults and their own struggles, and to give some context for why some of the parents act the ways they do, even if it is upsetting to the kids. I also really appreciated that in this love story about teens, we are shown how it is really important to not make one person your everything. There's a part where Charlie is really struggling with his mental health, and Nick is talking to his mom and saying how he just loves Charlie so much and he wants to support him and he wants to help fix him and help get him better. And his mom very wisely tells him, you know, I know you love Charlie and it's really important for you to be there and to support him and, you know, listen to him when he needs to talk, but you're not going to be able to fix all of his problems by yourself. Neither should you try, nor should Charlie expect that. His mom tells Nick, you know, Charlie needs his other friends, he needs his family, he needs his therapist, he needs a whole network of support, and it's unhealthy to try to be all of that just as one single person, especially when you yourself are just another teenage boy. I think that this is a lesson that translates to people of any age. I think even as an adult, people need to recognize that it is very unhealthy to expect one person to be your all or nothing, to be able to support you and fix you and help you through every single problem that you're going to have in your life. And it is much healthier and it is much less of a burden and struggle for your partner if you also have other people that you can turn to. But that's just me and that's my opinion, and I was just glad to see that reflected in the lessons that the kids learn in the series. I'm not going to rate the books individually, but so far for the first 5 books of this series, I'm happy to give 5 stars. I think that it's emotionally impactful, I think it's adorable, I think it's silly, I think there's a lot of important representation and it's handled really well. I also love the art. I think the art is really adorable. I'm really hoping that the last book manages to tie it all together, and even after I read that, I still feel like it's a 5-star series. I recommend the series for literally anybody. They're graphic novels, so they're easy and fast to get through. They're poignant. The lessons that they're being taught even as kids, I think, are important for adults to learn or to revisit. So yeah, highly recommend Heartstopper. The final book that I read for April was a much anticipated reread, and that was Pachinko by Min-Jin Lee. I think I first read this book maybe 10 years ago, so I honestly was going into this almost like it was a fresh read because I remembered pretty much nothing other than the basic premise and the fact that I had loved it the first time around. Oh, Pachinko. This was just as powerful the second time around. This story begins in Korea in the early 1900s with a young Korean girl named Sonja, and the book follows 4 generations of her family across multiple continents and tells the story of their lives. At the beginning of this book, Sonja becomes infatuated with this wealthy Korean businessman and ends up pregnant with his child, but she finds out that he is already married, already has a family in Japan, and instead of agreeing to become that man's mistress, Sonja ends up marrying this very kind-hearted and gentle and compassionate minister that she and her mother are hosting at their boarding house. So she marries this minister and she moves to Japan with him, and we see her raise her children, and we just watch the ways that their lives are all impacted by this initial interaction she has with that wealthy businessman, and the way that their lives unfold and decisions and circumstances and chance all seem to combine into the experience that this family has. This book is about so many things. It's about family and devotion and love and sacrifice and the things that you're willing to do to protect your family, and just the indifference of chance, the inescapable arc of history. Min-Jin Lee is also one of those authors who, even though she's writing a book that is full of so many emotional elements and emotional relationships, she has so much restraint. She is not someone who is going to beg you to feel something, if you know what I mean. She is not someone who is lining her pages with lush descriptions or overwrought emotions. She's extremely restrained and almost stoic in the way she writes, and yet despite all of that, it was such an emotional read. I felt so many things about so many of these characters, and I think that really speaks to the power of her storytelling. This is very much a character and relationship driven story, even though there, is an overarching plot and we're talking about different historical points. It is about the people. It is about the people. It is about their relationships to each other. It is about their discovery of what their own lives mean to themselves and their search for place and meaning. The structure of the novel is interesting because while Sunja's family, the Paik family, remains the central heart and engine of the story, we get to look into the lives of the people around them. So even the peripheral characters and their relationships, we get to explore and see how they are also very colorfully multifaceted. As we're exploring all of these characters and their lives, we're also looking at the ways that life is a balance of your own actions, your own choices, the path that you try to choose for yourself, but also chance, the actions of other people, history, things that are completely out of your control. So your life and its trajectory, right, is a balance of things that you can control and the myriad of things that you cannot. And I think it is very much like the game of pachinko, where it's a game of chance and you can do certain things to try to influence the way that the balls are going to fall, the way the game is going to go. But in the end, a lot of it is just left up to life. While this book spans many decades, when we start the story, we are at a time when Japan has colonized and is brutally occupying Korea and abusing, beating, killing Koreans. And I think this time around, reading about it, that aspect of the story and of history really hit home for me. I think that a lot of people who pick up this book and otherwise don't really know about the history of Japan and Korea's relationship and the history of Japan's long list of human rights violations and war crimes. When I was a young girl, I think I was still in elementary school, maybe middle school, I went back to visit my family in Korea, and I remember telling my grandparents that I had a friend, my closest friend at the time was a Japanese girl, and I remember how upset that made my grandparents. She was saying, no, that can't ever work out, like you shouldn't trust this girl, you know, Japanese people are dangerous, etc., etc. And I remember being so upset about this at the time. I thought they were being awful. And it wasn't until later when I had learned about the history with Japan and Japan's occupation of Korea and the way that they treated Koreans. It wasn't until I had that context that my grandparents' reactions made sense to me. When Japan colonized and occupied Korea, Koreans were treated horrifically. We weren't allowed to use our own language. We weren't allowed to use our own names. We had to take on Japanese names. And if Koreans were caught speaking Korean or calling each other by their Korean names, they could be beaten, they could be jailed, they could be killed. They were harassed, they were starved. Koreans who ended up in Japan were treated as less than second-class citizens. There was so much prejudice and hatred against Koreans. In the beginning of the story, when Sonja first meets Hansu, who is that wealthy businessman, he tells her, you know, you have to be careful. Don't go with any Japanese person who tells you they have a job, they're taking girls, they're disappearing girls. And what that is referring to, and is talked about a little more later in the story, is during this time, the Japanese were kidnapping Korean girls and women as young as like 11, 12 years old, taking them, whether just straight up kidnapping them or lying to them and saying that they had jobs available for them. They would take them to China to be sexual slaves, essentially, to Japanese troops. There are no exact numbers, but the estimate is that Japan kidnapped upwards of 400,000 women and girls and forced them into sexual slavery for Japanese soldiers, and 90% of upwards of 400,000 girls and women died. They died abroad in China or wherever they were sent, and they never made it home. They called these girls and women comfort women, which is just a euphemism for sexual slaves, right? They were forced into sexual slavery, and only 10% of those girls and women made it back to Korea. And even after they made it home, the Japanese government, Japanese army, they offered no apology, they offered no support, whether financial or whatever it may be. And it's only rather recently that, after immense pressure from the remaining surviving comfort women and their families, that Japan offered a rather lukewarm apology and some compensation for the way that they treated and abused and enslaved these women, right? And this isn't even touching on some of the horrific things that Japanese troops did to people in China, you know, the rape of Nanjing. I know I'm going on a bit of a tangent, and these things are not really central to the book and they're not covered in any detail in the book, but just as a Korean person who thinks about the history of Korea and the very fraught relationship we have with Japan, seeing those things alluded to in this book just made me think about the very rich history that these people's lives are being built on. But let me just pull it back and say that on my reread, I still absolutely love this book, even though my personal preference is for more lyrical, emotive, and emotional language in my books. I just thought that the way that it was written was so powerful, and I think that if you are interested in a multi-generational family story, or if you like character-driven books, or if you're interested in reading about a Korean family and getting a peek into the history of Korea and the way that people lived through certain decades, and I absolutely recommend this book. My rating is absolutely going to be biased and colored by the fact that I am Korean, and that made me have a certain emotional connection to this book, and I shan't apologize for that. I'm going to give this book 5 stars. I don't think that this is going to be the book for everyone at every point in their lives. I do think that to appreciate it in its totality, you have to be in a certain mood, or you have to be willing to read a certain type of story. But when you are there, I highly recommend you pick up this book. It is such a heartbreaking and brutal and raw story about this family, and I definitely do think that I want to watch the TV adaptation. I've seen scenes here and there, and I can already tell that there are ways that they've changed the story for a TV adaptation, but yeah, I'm still really interested in watching that. I think my mom has already seen it, so I don't know, maybe she's down for a rewatch with me. But yes, the last book that I read in April was Pachinko, and I absolutely loved it. While filming this video, I have pretty much watched the sun set outside my window, so thank you so much if you managed to stick with me through all 15 books that I read in April. I think it was a really good reading month. I didn't actually have a book that I disliked or rated under 3.5, so great reading month for me. If you've read any of these books and have thoughts, please let me know in the comments, and also let me know what your favorite read of April was. As always, thank you so much for being here. Happy reading, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. I will say that even though it's, I will say that though, I will, what? I also love the art. I think the art, I think